Hello, welcome to Physiology. We will talk about motor physiology and reflexes. Okay, um, before we talk about the details, let's have an overview. This picture basically guides us for this lecture. This is like the outline of today's lecture. We have uh, to, uh, to for motor control, we have three levels. The lowest level is actually occur in the spinal cord. You may ask, how come? I thought that, we learned about the primary motor cortex M1, right? Do you still remember the location of M1? Let me give you 5 seconds to think about it, the location of M1. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, time's up. The location of M1 is actually in the frontal cortex. Specifically, it is at the precentral gyrus. Precentral gyrus, okay? So, but how come in here it says spinal cord is the lowest level? Well, believe it or not, our spinal cord can actually generate action or movement, and the action and movement they generate we call it reflex. So, spinal cord level, the motor response, they are the reflex. We'll talk about the receptors that are involved in the reflexes. We'll talk about three types of reflexes, and we have three different types of receptors. And also we'll talk about the muscle fiber that they control. Basically, we'll only talk about two types of muscle fibers. We will focus on only one type of. We'll get into details of one type of reflex. That we'll talk about two types of muscle fibers. That is the lowest level, or AKA the local level. The local level. Second one is the middle level. Middle level is already in the brain. Okay. Okay, we have my favorite structure, cerebellum. Okay, this is my favorite structure, cerebellum. We have the basal ganglia and thalamus. We'll focus on this part, basal ganglia and thalamus, because I will talk about the circuitry for Parkinson's disease here. And then the highest level, we will only briefly touch about the highest level. I will not go too much about the highest level. So I may ask you a question like which one, if it is a multiple choice, now I'll ask you which of the following belongs to the highest level, or which of the following belongs to the middle level, and which of the following belongs to the lowest level. There are many type of there are three kinds of question I can ask you based on this picture. So yeah, I hope you know which structure belongs to which level for the motor control. Okay, that's about it. Now we will start with the lowest level, and then we go to middle level, and then the last one we go to the highest level. The lowest level we'll talk about three reflexes. We'll talk about three reflexes. So the first one will be called a stretch reflex. Stretch reflex involves muscle spindle as the receptor. And then we will talk about something called well, it has different name. Okay, some textbook, some website, some textbook, they call it a tension reflex, or some simply called tendon reflex, but some actually call it Golgi tendon reflex. Golgi tendon reflex. So it has 3 different names, okay? And the receptor that it involves, oops, okay, just forget about this. The receptor that it involves is called, well, Golgi tendon organ. GTO, okay? GTO is the acronym. The last one is called withdrawal. It's called what kind of reflex? Withdrawal reflex. Withdrawal reflex has different name. You can call it withdrawal. You can call it flexor. You can call it flexion. So it has 3 different names: flexion reflex. You can call it withdrawal reflex, flexor reflex, flexion reflex. The receptor that it involves, it is called nociceptor, which, if you remember, it is the pink receptor. Nociceptor is a free nerve ending. Okay. Now, let's start with our first one, stretch reflex. It is a very common one. Of course, we want to look at the receptor first. The receptor is the muscle spindle. Okay, I am running out of space, so I put it here. Muscle spindle. So what is muscle spindle? Okay, let's put the, let me see, sorry for my bad handwriting. Muscle spindle, and then what's the function? Function is to detect the length of the muscle. Remember, we talked about the relationship between tension and the length of the muscle. What is the optimal length of the muscle that produces the strongest tension or strongest muscle contraction? What is the optimal length of the muscle that will produce a strongest tension? I'll give you 5 seconds to think about it. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, time's up. The optimum length of the muscle is when the muscle is completely relaxed. That is the optimal length to produce the strongest tension or strongest muscle contraction. What about structure? So muscle spindle, what made muscle spindle? Muscle spindle consists of different parts. Okay, muscle spindle consists of capsule, intrafusal muscle fiber. Intrafusal muscle fiber, and then you have the, okay, this is a Greek letter, gamma, okay, gamma motor neuron. And then you have a stretch receptor, and then you have the afferent neuron. So all these, well, afferent neuron, gamma, actually, let's put it this way. Okay, let me put a parenthesis here. I try to be anatomically correct. So these two neurons, they are not part of the muscle spindle. Muscle spindle only consists of two things: capsule, intrafusal muscle fiber, and stretch receptor. So let's take a look at the pictures here. Let's take a look on the right-hand side of this picture. Okay, this picture is easier to see. Capsule is basically a membrane sac that wraps around the entire muscle spindle, everything. So it's like protection, you know, wrap around everything. And then inside the capsule, you have two cylindrical thingy here. This is what we call the intrafusal muscle fiber. What is intrafusal muscle fiber? Intrafusal muscle fiber, they are also skeletal muscle. They also have a sarcomere, dark and light band. They are part of the they are also skeletal muscle. They are also we can also control the length. So the relationship of this intrafusal muscle and with the muscle that you learn in the anatomy. Remember, we memorize a lot of muscle in the anatomy. The muscle that we learn in the anatomy, we call them extrafusal muscle fiber. We call it extrafusal muscle fiber. Extrafusal muscle fiber, that is the muscle that we learn in the anatomy. So where is the location of this muscle spindle? The muscle spindle is actually embedded inside the extrafusal muscle fiber. That means it is embedded inside the skeletal muscle that we memorize in the anatomy. So the entire capsule, intrafusal muscle fiber, and stretch receptor, they are all inside the extrafusal muscle fiber. And then extrafusal muscle, let me give you an example. For example, your quadriceps, they are the extrafusal muscle fiber. And we also have stretch receptor. What is stretch receptors? Well, stretch receptors, they are basically nerve ending. The nerve ending or axonal terminal, but they wrap around something. In this case, they wrap around the intrafusal muscle fiber. So they wrap around the intrafusal muscle fiber. Oh, I colored it, but you cannot see it clearly. That's okay. They wrap around the intrafusal muscle fibers. These three nerve endings wrap around the intrafusal muscle fiber. And the axon that connects to this axonal terminal free nerve ending, or the axon that connects to this stretch receptor, to be more precise, we call this afferent nerve, afferent neuron, meaning that the action potential goes into the CNS. How do we trigger action potential? Very simple. When there's a change of the length of the receptor, for example, when we are stretching it, when we are pulling it, when we're stretching it, increasing the length, we call stretch receptor, meaning that it responds to stretch. When we pull the intrafusal muscle fiber, then it will trigger action potential. When we compress the intrafusal muscle fiber, then we hyperpolarize it. Okay? And as you can see that the gamma motor neuron, it innervates the intrafusal muscle fiber. Innervate the intrafusal muscle fiber, meaning that gamma motor neuron is a top down. You can see that it is the action potential is going to the intrafusal muscle. So our brain send action potential to the intrafusal muscle fiber so that you will contract. You will contract. Actually, not just our brain, the spinal cord too. The spinal cord can send action potential along the gamma motor neuron to tell the intrafusal muscle fiber to contract. And then, well, what about extrafusal muscle fiber? Extrafusal muscle fiber, they have the alpha motor neuron. You see that I label here? This is extrafusal muscle fiber. This is the alpha motor neuron. So why do we call some motor neuron alpha, some motor neuron gamma? It has something to do with the size. Well, as you see that the repeated theme in my physiology is that size matters. Okay, size matters. Alpha motor neuron, we call it alpha because it has a big diameter. The diameter of the axon is huge. And then after alpha, we have beta, we have delta, and then we have gamma. So as you can see, the gamma, okay, it's just a very thin or tiny little bit of the, it's a tiny little bit of the axon. The axon diameter of gamma is very small. That's why we call it gamma. Similarly, the extrafusal muscle fiber, they are a lot bigger, because they are the skeletal muscle that we learned from the anatomy, so they are a lot bigger. But the intrafusal muscle fiber, they are a lot thinner and smaller. So you can see the relationship. Gamma motor neuron, smaller neuron, then they go to the smaller or thinner intrafusal muscle fiber. Bigger, thicker alpha motor neuron, they go to the bigger muscle, extrafusal muscle fiber. So size matters, so they match the size. And you can see that in the right hand side of this picture, you can see that, oh, okay, the muscle spindle, it is embedded in the, extrafusal muscle fiber. So what happened when you have this structure or configuration is that when your extrafusal muscle fiber, that means let's say your quadricep is stretching or contracting, when the length of the quadricep or extrafusal muscle fiber is changing, let's say it is contracting and shortening like this. When it is like this, then the intrafusal muscle fiber, because it is embedded in the extrafusal, it will also contract at the same time. The external one contract, the internal one will also be contract at the same time. Similarly, when the extrafusal muscle fiber, let's say your quadricep relax and increase the length, And then the intrafusal muscle fiber will also relax and increase the length at the same time, because they are embedded, because the muscle spindle is embedded inside the extrafusal muscle fiber, or quadricep, let's say. Then so the changes of the length will be together. Okay. So let me give you more notes, lecture notes. So for the extrafusal muscle fiber, you have alpha motor neuron, and something very interesting, it is this arrow here. The afferent neuron can actually activate extrafusal muscle fiber. How? I'll show you in the next few slides. When we talk about the stretch reflex, you will see how the afferent neuron activate the extrafusal muscle fiber. Okay. All right, this one. How? What happened? I told you that when the extrafusal muscle fiber contract, then the intrafusal muscle fiber also contract. So the muscle spindle also contract. When the extrafusal muscle fiber relax and lengthen, then the muscle spindle and the intrafusal muscle fiber also lengthen. So it follows the extrafusal muscle fiber. So we have two cases here. Case one, when the extrafusal muscle fiber stretch. So when the extrafusal muscle fiber stretch, your muscle spindle also stretch in the center here. In the center here, this also stretch. When the intrafusal muscle fiber stretch, what will happen? It will stretch the stretch receptor. Okay, why do we call stretch receptor? Because when the stretch receptor is stretched, this sounds very redundant. When the stretch receptor stretch, it will trigger action potential. And then it will send, we call this afferent neuron. Action potential will travel to the afferent neuron, and then it will go to the CNS. That means it will go to the spinal cord, and also it will go to the brain eventually. And as you know, the stretch receptor is activated by stretching. So when you activate the stretch receptor, you will trigger action potential. Therefore, you can see that here, during the stretch, you have increased firing of the action potential. You have more. Now the opposite case, when muscle contract, so the length of the extrafusal muscle fiber decrease, so they come together like this. Then, as you can see that the muscle spindle and also the intrafusal muscle fiber, they shorten. Everything shorten. When it's shortened, well, what happened to the stretch receptor? The stretch receptor, well, as you can see in here, contraction causes hyperpolarization. When you have hyperpolarization, it inhibits the firing of the action potential. So it decreases. You may ask me, hey, professor, what about these? What is that? It is before the contraction or before the stretch. How come this action potential firing? We call this baseline activity. Baseline activity. These are called baseline activity or baseline firing or baseline action potential. Doesn't matter. Baseline. What is the purpose of this baseline activity? Meaning that when your muscle is relaxed, meaning that it is not stretching or it is not relaxed, is actually in the middle. You have the stretch, you have the relax, and then you have the contraction. When your muscle is relaxing, that means it is not contracting, not stretching. Guess what? It is still firing. You still have action potential on the afferent neuron. Your stretch receptor fire, but it fire at a baseline level. What is the purpose of the baseline firing? What's the purpose of the baseline action potential? Let me give you 5 seconds to think about this. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, time's up. The purpose of the baseline firing is to give you the muscle tone. What do I mean by muscle tone? Believe it or not, let's say if you're sitting here, you're relaxed, you're in the relaxed state. That means you are not contracting, you're not stretching. Your muscle has a mild contraction that you are not aware of. We call it muscle tone. The mild contraction in your muscle that you are not aware of, we call it muscle tone. What is the purpose of muscle tone? The purpose of muscle tone is for you to maintain posture. Maintain posture. Maintain posture. Maintain posture. When under what situation we don't have muscle tone? Well, remember rigor mortis? I forgot to ask you this question today. But what happened when what happened after rigor mortis? Okay, you know that there's a what's that called? How do I put it this way? After rigor mortis, what will happen? After rigor mortis, your body will become completely soft and flaccid. That is the time when you don't have muscle tone, when you have absolutely no muscle tone. When you have absolutely no muscle tone, that means you're dead, basically. Yes. And why? How come we learned that when there's no ATP, then we'll have rigor mortis. But how come after a while, rigor mortis will stop and then the entire dead body will become completely soft and flaccid? Anyone knows why? Let me give you 5 seconds to think about the answer. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, time's up. The answer is that after rigor mortis, yes, we don't have the ATPs. Theoretically, the cross bridge continuously binds to the actin. But as you know that when a body is dead, when someone is dead, the dead body starts to decay. The decay of the body will break down the connection between the actin and myosin. In other words, the actin and myosin, they're protein filament. They will eventually start to decay. When they start to decay, of course, even when you have no ATP, the cross bridge or the myosin head, they will detach from the actin, even though you have no ATP, because everything starts to degrade. In this case, then the body will lose the rigor mortis, and also then the muscle of the body will completely lose the muscle tone. It is the only time when you have no muscle tone. When you have no muscle tone, then what will happen? well, I try not to get to it. There's a psychological disorder called narcophilia. Well, every time I mention this, students they don't want to hear this, they don't want to know about this. So you can Google it if you want to. You can read about this, but if you have a nightmare, don't blame your professor. Okay. So yeah, some people prefer it soft. Okay, that's the only thing I would tell you. Some people prefer soft. Okay. So the baseline activity, the baseline firing of the action potential in your muscle, give you the muscle tone. Muscle tone give you the posture, give you the posture. Um, um, okay. What else do I need to talk about? Okay. Now we'll talk about the reflex circuitry. So if you are taking lecture notes with your paper notebook, or if you are taking lecture notes with your fancy tablet or iPad, I want you to have a new page, and the page should be a landscape. New blank page, landscape. And then I want you to draw this as large as possible. The way I draw it is a little bit small. Ew. Ew. Okay, the way I draw it is a little bit small. Okay, let's draw it bigger. Let's draw it bigger. It's still small. It's okay, whatever. I usually draw it on the whiteboard using both of my hand, to draw it on the whiteboard. Now I'm using one hand to draw it because I only have one stylus. Okay, so it looks really bad, but it's okay. It's okay. Um, okay, this is a really bad drawing. This is the first time I use one hand to draw this. I hope you can tell this is the transverse section of a spinal cord. Okay, and let's see if you know what that is, what this is. Okay, let me label something first to help you with this. We call this dorsal horn. We call this white matter. It's a brief review of your anatomy. We call this gray matter. We call this ventral horn. In general, if you take neuroanatomy, when I take neuroanatomy, my neuroanatomy professor told us that if we draw an arbitrary line dividing the spinal cord into dorsal and ventral side, okay, in general, okay, the dorsal side, they are for sensory. And then the ventral side, they are for motor. All right. So dorsal side is for sensory, ventral side is for motor. So for the sake of clarity, I'll just erase this part. Okay. Now, what is this bulb here? What is this bulb here? What do you call this bulb? I don't know if you know that from your, you still remember from your anatomy. We call this DRG. What is DRG? Anyone knows? Let me give you 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Time's up. DRG stand for dorsal root ganglion. Now, anatomy review. What is the definition of ganglion? We talked about this when we briefly mentioned about Parkinson's disease, if you still remember my lecture. Ganglion, let me repeat to you, ganglion is the collection of cell bodies in PNS, okay? Collection of cell bodies in PNS. What about the collection of cell bodies in CNS? What do we call that? Collection of cell bodies in CNS, we call it a nucleus or nuclei, depending on the plural or singular. All right, now let's take a look at the circuitry. We are talking about stretch reflex. Okay, do I have enough space? I don't have enough space. Okay. Okay, this is what we call stretch reflex. Okay. Stretch reflex, the most famous example of stretch reflex is almost everyone knows. Is the knee jerk. Remember, we did the experiment about knee jerk reflex. Okay, I asked you to use the hammer, to use the we call it reflex hammer. The reflex hammer to hit the patellar tendon. No, sorry, patellar ligament, not patellar tendon. Patellar ligament. When you use the reflex hammer to hit the patellar ligament, then you will trigger this stretch reflex. Now I'll explain to you how. Remember, I told you that what kind of receptor is involved in the stretch reflex in the previous slides. Remember, that is the muscle spindle. Muscle spindle is the receptor for stretch reflex. And then guess what? This is the afferent neurons. This is the afferent neuron. Let me label that so that, oh, can I? I don't think I can tilt it really well. Okay, good. And then guess what? The dorsal root ganglion actually has the cell body of this afferent neuron here. And then you will have you'll go in from the dorsal horn, and then you'll split 4 different ways here, 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 and here. 4 different ways, okay? 4 ways. Let's talk about the easiest one, So arrow means excitatory axon terminals. Excitatory axon terminal, and then I'll put a circle here. This circle is the cell body. As you know, the cell body has what? Cell body has the dendrite. So I'm not drawing the dendrite. I'm just saying that, okay, this axon terminal form synapse with another cell body, of course the dendrite. This is the most common form of synapse. We learn about this exodendritic synapse. So we assume they form the synapse with this neuron here. This neuron actually go up. Where does it go to? Your brain. And guess what? Your brain also go down. It also send a top-down signal to inhibit. Okay, theoretically, the inhibitory synapse should be formed at the synapse, but since I don't want to cross it, I try not to cross it. I'm just saying that you inhibit the everything. In other words, what does it mean? Goes to the brain. As I mentioned, that when it goes to the brain, it means that you're aware of what happened. You can perceive what happened. So it forms the perception. In other words, when someone used a reflex hammer to hit your patellar ligament, can you feel it? Yes, you can feel it. Why can you feel it? Because this bottom-up pathway. This bottom-up pathway go to your brain, then you can feel it in your head. You feel that, okay, someone is hitting your patellar ligament with the reflex hammer. And remember, in the experiment, we have part A, part B, part C. Part A is hitting the patellar ligament with the reflex hammer. So you have a normal knee-jerk reflex. What is part B? Part B is that I want the subject to intentionally inhibit the reflex so that when the experimenter hit your patellar ligament, then I'm not moving it. How do you do this? You are using this top-down inhibition. Your brain, you can intentionally inhibit all the reflex there so that you have either no movement or a little bit of the reflex amplitude. So this is what it means. It goes to the brain so that you can feel that someone is hitting your patellar ligament. And you can intentionally to inhibit all kinds of reflex because of this top-down inhibition. All right. Now, let's talk about the interneuron. Let me see. Oh. We have a excitatory interneuron here. And then we have a inhibitory interneuron here. Then you may ask, Professor, what about the middle one? The middle one, we have no interneuron. This one goes to extensor. What is extensor? For example, your quadricep. And what about this one? This one, inhibitory neuron, goes to your flexor. What is your flexor? For example, your hamstring. Okay, and then what about the last one here? The excitatory interneuron will goes to your, guess what? It goes to your, you'll go back to your muscle spindle. Now let's see how good is your short-term memory. Remember in the previous in one of the previous slides, we talk about when we talk about muscle spindle structure, the structure of the muscle spindle. What kind of nerve will innervate the muscle spindle? Do you remember the name of that nerve? Let me give you 5 seconds to review. You can feel free to flip back your lecture notes. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, time's up. The neuron that innervate your muscle spindle, we call it what? Gamma motor neuron. Gamma motor neuron. What about the neuron that innervate your quadricep and hamstring? We call them alpha motor neuron and alpha motor neuron here. Alpha looks like gamma, but okay, I hope you can tell the differences, alpha and gamma. Okay, this motor neuron is alpha, this is also alpha, and this is gamma, okay? And we call these two, do I have enough space to write on it? The innervation between the extensor and the flexor, we call it reciprocal. Innervation. Okay, let me explain to you about the knee-jerk reflex. So we all know that it is very simple. Let's say this is your knee. Okay, this is your knee. This is your leg. This is your thigh. Okay, this is your thigh. Okay, can you see that? This is your thigh. This is your knee. This is your leg. Then when you hit your patellar tendon, then of course, everyone know that your knee will jerk. Okay. When you hit your patellar tendon, then your knee will jerk. So what happened? When you hit the patellar tendon, guess what? When you hit the patellar tendon, you basically compress your patellar tendon. When you compress your, not tendon, I'm sorry, patellar ligament. When you hit your patellar ligament, okay, you actually compress the patellar ligament, and the patellar ligament connects to your patellar bone, and the patellar bone connects to the, some people call it patellar tendon, some people call it quadricep tendon. This tendon connects to your quadricep muscle. So when you hit or compress your patellar ligament, basically you are indirectly stretching your quadricep muscle. And guess what? Inside your quadricep muscle, you have a muscle spindle. And it is the muscle spindle we see in here. It is this muscle spindle here that we see in here. Okay? This muscle spindle is embedded in this extensor quadricep here. So, in other words, when we hit the patellar ligament, we are stretching the muscle spindle. When we stretch the muscle spindle, then we will trigger an action potential going along the afferent neuron. Of course, I told you that, okay, it splits at this point, so an action potential will go to here, and then you have the synaptic chemical synapse, so that the action potential can travel to the postsynaptic neuron here to go to your brain. Then you will feel that someone is hitting you with the reflex hammer. What about the other three? First of all, it will go to your extensor muscle. Why? Why I talk about extensor muscle first? Because extensor muscle has no interneuron here. When there's no interneuron here, what do we call that? We call this monosynaptic. Monosynaptic, meaning that it has only one synapse. Yes, one synapse here. Monosynaptic, one synapse here. So action potential go through this chemical synapse, and then you activate this alpha motor neuron to cause your extensor quadriceps to contract. Okay, when your extensor quadriceps contract, what will happen? Your extensor quadriceps contract, then you will raise your leg up so that it is the reflex. But at the same time, you have an action potential going through this branch, and then it will activate or excite the inhibitory motor neuron. This is an inhibitory interneuron, not motor neuron, inhibitory interneuron. When you activate this inhibitory interneuron will release GABA. So the GABA will bind to this alpha motor neuron. When GABA binds to this alpha motor neuron, what will happen? You will trigger IPSP, or hyperpolarization, in this alpha motor neuron. When you have hyperpolarization occur in this alpha motor neuron, that means there will be no action potential. When there's no action potential, what will happen to the flexor muscle? No action potential. That means the flexor muscle or hamstring, they will be relaxed. So that's what happened when the extensor muscle contract. When the extensor muscle contract, the hamstring flexor muscle will relax, so that it will allow the jerking of your lower limb, your lower leg. When extensor contract, flexor relax, then your leg can jerk. Okay, that's why we call that reciprocal innervation. Reciprocal meaning that one muscle excite, the other muscle inhibit. Okay, you must have this, otherwise, well, if both muscles are excite and contract, you will have the co-contraction. Okay, you don't want this to happen. And then last but not least, you have also action potential going through this branch here. Okay, and then you activate this excitatory interneuron. This excitatory interneuron also uses glutamate, and then when glutamate neurotransmitter binds to this blue gamma motor neuron, this blue gamma motor neuron will have action potential. When you have action potential going through this gamma motor neuron, what will happen? When this gamma motor neuron innervate the intrafusal muscle fiber, they innervate the intrafusal muscle fiber, then this intrafusal muscle fiber will contract. That's why I told you that when the extrafusal muscle fiber, let's say the quadriceps contract, the intrafusal muscle fiber inside the muscle spindle, they will also contract as well. They will follow because of this circuitry here. And do you remember I told you that the afferent neuron can activate the alpha motor neuron? This is what I told you. The afferent motor neuron can activate the alpha motor neuron, the extrafusal muscle fiber. This is what I mentioned in the previously in the slides. Okay, monosynaptic. As you can see that this is not monosynaptic. This is also not monosynaptic. What do we call that? Some people call this polysynaptic because it is not mono. And they just simplify. If it is not mono, let's just call it poly. Synaptic. Some people, they are very precise. Instead of just call it poly, they call it disynaptic. Disynaptic, that means you have two synapses. So in either case, disynaptic or polysynaptic, they are describing similar thing. Okay, they are not monosynaptic. Yeah, As long as they are not monosynaptic, people don't care. Why is this so important for monosynaptic connection? Because monosynaptic is the fastest. Monosynaptic reflex is the fastest. Let me repeat. Monosynaptic reflex is the fastest. Okay? In other words, stretch reflex, knee-jerk reflex is the fastest reflex among the three. Because in stretch reflex or knee-jerk reflex, we have monosynaptic connection. We have monosynaptic circuitry there. That makes it the fastest reflex among the three that we learn in here. Okay? What else? What else we need to know? We talk about reciprocal innervation. We talk about monosynaptic reflex, and okay, guess what? They are the receptor and the effector. Okay, one is receptor, one is effector. The effector muscle, extensor and flexor. Flexor is also effector. Okay, flexor is also effector. Extensor and flexor, they are both effector. The receptor is receptor. The effectors, you have two effector, the extensor and flexor. They're all on the same side, same leg, we call it, therefore we call it ipsilateral. It sounds very obvious, yeah. You did the knee-jerk reflex experiment, you know that when you hit your left, let's say your left patellar ligament, then your left leg will jerk. It sounds like obvious, but trust me, as we go into details, you may even forget about this. Ipsilateral expression in the exam, if I ask you about, is it ipsilateral, if what's the characteristic, then you may even mix up, oh, okay. But just remember, knee-jerk reflex always ipsilateral because whichever knee you hit, it is the same leg that will jerk up. And then what's the function? Oh, I'm running out of space. Okay, I'll put it here. It is not very organized. If I have the entire whiteboard, it will look a lot better. What's the function? This stretch reflex is to, there are multiple functions, okay? Again, maintain posture. Of course, what is the function of the muscle spindle? The function of the muscle spindle is the same as the function of this stretch reflex. Prevent muscle damage from overstretching of muscle. Remember, we talked about this. When we look at the graph, the tension and muscle length graph, we said that if we stretch the muscle, then it will decrease the tension or the contraction it can produce. When we stretch the muscle, the tension and the contraction will decrease because you will have minimum or no overlapping of actin and myosin. And when you stretch too much, you have torn muscle, which is the damage of the muscle. You don't want that. And guess what? Okay, you have function number 1. I apologize, I should number this. You have function number 2. And then function number 3 was that doctors use knee-jerk reflex to check what? Let me double check if I'm correct. Check the lumbar 2, 3, 4. What is L2, 3, 4? It is the spinal nerve of the in the lumbar region. Spinal nerve, lumbar 2, 3, 4. That is what the doctor is checking. Doctor wants to check if your lower back spinal cord or lower back spinal nerve, are they healthy or not? Sometimes some people may have injury at the lower back. If they have injury at the lower back, it may affect their knee-jerk reflex. So some people say that, oh, I don't have knee-jerk reflex. Well, most of you do not have lower back injury. Okay, so when people say, oh, I don't have no knee-jerk reflex, basically what happens is that when people hit their patellar ligament, they intentionally inhibit it. They are using this pathway, intentionally inhibit the reflex. That's why they said, oh, I don't have knee-jerk reflex. No, people have lower back injury that damage the L2, L3, or L4. They will usually have weaker knee-jerk reflex. Weaker knee-jerk reflex meaning that the amplitude of jerking, the amplitude of jerking, it will be smaller. Okay. It is very difficult to wipe out the completely the knee-jerk reflex, because reflex, the general function of the reflex is to protect ourselves. It's for protection. Almost all reflexes are for protecting our body from injury. That's why it is very difficult to completely wipe out your reflex. Even if you have lower back injury, maybe you damage your L2, but your L3 and 4 still intact. Maybe you damage L2 and L3, your L4 still intact. As long as you have one nerve that is intact, you still have the knee-jerk reflex, but it will just be weaker or lower amplitude. Okay. So these are the three functions of the knee-jerk reflex. Let me put a star. Let me highlight this part. Maintain posture. Maintain posture. Okay. If knee-jerk reflex is for maintaining posture, what kind of extensor or what type of muscle fiber the extrafusal muscle fiber is? Is it type 1, type 2A, or type 2B? Or should I say, is it the slow oxidative, fast oxidative, or fast glycolytic muscle fiber? So let me repeat the question. If the stretch reflex is for maintaining posture, then what will be the extrafusal muscle fiber involved in the stretch reflex? Is the extrafusal muscle fiber slow oxidative, fast oxidative, or fast glycolytic? Or I can ask you, is the muscle fiber type 1, type 2A, or type 2B? You need to answer this question. Think about this at home, okay? And then let me see if I missed anything. Let me double check if I missed anything. Reciprocal, knee-jerk, CNS. I think it's okay. Okay. Okay, now let's go to the second type. The second type of reflex we will talk about is I mentioned about before this. It is called tension reflex. Some textbook call it tendon reflex. Some textbook call it Golgi. Golgi tendon reflex. What is the receptor it involves? It's okay. Let's put it this receptor. The receptor is called GTO. Remember, Golgi tendon organ. GTO. What is the function of this receptor? What's the function of Golgi tendon organ? To detect muscle tension. So where is the location of Golgi tendon organ? Let me see if I can pause. Okay, where is the Golgi tendon organ located? Let me see if you can see this. Okay. Okay. Sorry, I cannot show you the pictures. So if you refer back to your previous pictures, if you refer your previous picture here, remember when we talk about the muscle spindle, then you have a picture. You have two pictures. One is a schematic drawing. The other one is like a more realistic drawing. In a more realistic drawing, you will see that the Golgi tendon organ, when you talk about, well, basically the name tells you the location. Muscle spindle. Where is the muscle spindle located? Muscle spindle is embedded in the skeletal muscle, the extrafusal muscle fiber. What about Golgi tendon organ? Golgi tendon organ is embedded in the tendon. Okay, so the name of the receptor tells you the location. Muscle spindle located in the extrafusal muscle fiber. In the skeletal muscle, Golgi tendon organ is located inside the tendon. Okay, so so let me give you an example of the Golgi tendon reflex. It is like this. Okay. Remember the knee-jerk reflex? We hit the patellar ligament here. Then your knee jerk like this, right? Now, what about this Golgi tendon reflex? We hit the patellar tendon. Remember, this is the Golgi tendon reflex. That's why we hit the tendon. We hit the quadricep tendon, or some people call it patellar tendon here. When you hit this tendon, guess what? Guess what will happen? When you hit this tendon, your leg, instead of jerking up, it will actually contract like this. Let me show you again. it will actually contract like this. So when I hit, then it will contract like this. So when we hit the patellar ligament, it will jerk, okay? But when we hit the quadricep tendon, it will contract like this, okay? So that's the differences. So how come it will happen like this? Well, let's draw the diagram again. This time, okay, you also, this time is smaller. We don't need to care about the right hand side, just the left hand side is fine. But we'll still draw the complete spinal cord. I'll make it smaller. Okay, it's the same thing. We have this. Oh, this is really bad. Central canal, okay. Same thing. We have the DRG. We have the DRG here, okay. Okay, now we have the Golgi tendon organ here. I am lazy, so I just call it GTO. I apologize for my laziness. Golgi tendon organ will also send an afferent neuron, and the cell body of the afferent neuron is also in the DRG, okay, dorsal root ganglia, and then it will bifurcate, it will split into 3 parts. Okay, let's do the easy one first. Easy one again. It goes up to the brain so that it tells you that, okay, someone is hitting your quadricep tendon. And then your brain also send a top-down inhibition. In other words, yes, you can inhibit your reflex. As a matter of fact, you can inhibit almost all kinds of reflex because of this top-down inhibition. Okay, the first one is easy. Now let's take a look at the next two. You have one inhibitory interneuron and you have one excitatory interneuron. Okay, and then guess what happened? Of course, you have this. This is the extensor muscle. Extensor muscle, okay, again, this is the quadricep. And guess what? This one goes to your flexor. And this is the hamstring. Okay. And of course, this is the alpha motor neuron. And this is also the alpha motor neuron. Okay. For the GTO, Golgi tendon organ, there's no gamma motor neuron. There's no gamma motor neuron. Okay. Again, the same thing. We call this polysynaptic. Or some people call it disynaptic. That's okay. Why? Because they are not monosynaptic. That's the whole point. As long as they're not monosynaptic, I don't care what they call, okay? As long as they're not monosynaptic, I don't care what they call, okay? Again, these two, what do we call these two? Reciprocal innervation. Reciprocal innervation, all right? Let me explain it to you now, okay? Same thing. When we hit the quadriceps tendon here, then we activate the GTO. We activate the GTO. We stimulate the GTO so that the GTO will fire action potential. So action potential will go up along this afferent neuron, and then you send the action potential to your brain so that, okay, I can feel that someone is hitting my quadriceps tendon. And then you will go through this excitatory synapse to activate or excite the green inhibitory neuron. Yes, activating the inhibitory interneuron so that the inhibitory neuron will fire action potential and release GABA because it is inhibitory, right? You release the GABA. So the GABA will bind to the alpha motor neuron here. When GABA binds to the alpha motor neuron here, what will that trigger? You will trigger IPSP. That means you will hyperpolarize the alpha motor neuron. And this alpha motor neuron innervate the extensor quadriceps. In other words, when I hit the quadriceps tendon, I will inhibit the quadriceps, meaning that I will relax the quadriceps here. Now, for this part, when there's an action potential going through this excitatory synapse here, so that it will release glutamate to bind to the excitatory interneuron. This green interneuron is excitatory interneuron because it is an arrowhead. When when glutamate binds to this green excitatory interneuron, then this green excitatory neuron will trigger action potential. But when the action potential reaches the axon terminal, it will release glutamate again because it is excitatory. It is an arrowhead. When it releases glutamate, when glutamate binds to the dendrite of this alpha motor neuron, then the alpha motor neuron will depolarize. And if the depolarization is strong enough, then it will trigger action potential. So the action potential will travel along this alpha motor neuron, and then the action potential will go to the flexor muscle, which is the hamstring. Remember, crossing the neuromuscular junction and stuff. We talk about this in the muscle lecture. And then the hamstring will contract. So it is this way. So when it hit the quadriceps tendon, the quadriceps will relax, but the flexor muscle here, will contract. When the flexor muscle contract, what will happen? Then your leg will pull, your leg will contract. Your leg will flex. Because flex, your leg will flex like this. So again, you need to have Again, you need to have one muscle relaxed, the extensor quadriceps relaxed, the flexor hamstring has to contract. Otherwise, you have co-contraction or co-relaxation. That means nothing, you don't see any movement. What's the function? Why do we do that? Okay. Well, think about this. The function is to detect muscle tension. So when you hit here, basically you are stretching your quadricep. No, when you hit here, let me see. You are stretching your quadricep. What's that mean? Detect muscle tension. How do I explain this? Think about this. So what happened is that, okay, same thing. When we hit the quadricep tendon here, then we basically stretching the quadricep muscle. And we don't want the quadricep muscle to stretch and cause any damage to itself. Then what do? We have the inhibition. We send the inhibitory through this circuitry here. We inhibit the quadricep so that the quadricep relax, so that you will stop stretching the quadricep muscle. So that's the whole point. It prevents, when you stimulate the tendon, it prevents the same muscle from overstretching. It prevents the same muscle from overstretching. In other words, the Golgi tendon organ, extensor, and also the flexor as well, they are also ipsilateral. So you can see that, okay, both stretch reflex and this tension reflex, they prevent your muscle from overstretching, but their strategy is different, and also their result is totally opposite. Okay, the stretch reflex, in order to prevent the overstretching of your quadricep muscle, it actually causing the muscle to contract, so that you will jerk, because you hit your patellar ligament here, and then you pull your quadricep muscle, and then in this case you want to prevent the overstretching of your quadricep muscle, so it contract. Okay, so it is like an extreme case to how to protect your muscle from overstretching. But this Golgi tendon reflex is a mild case. When you hit the Golgi tendon organ, when you hit the quadricep tendon here and stimulate the GTO, Golgi tendon organ, it also stretch the quadricep muscle. But instead of causing it to contract and jerk, it simply relax it. It simply relax it. It simply relax it so that you just flex it like that. So it's a mild case. Instead of causing it to contract, you simply relax it. And then function of this reflex. To prevent torn damage. It may not torn. Torn is like the extreme case, at least to prevent damage or torn of the tendon from overly strong muscle contraction. Believe it or not, our skeletal muscle is, when our skeletal muscle contract, it is strong enough to damage or even break our tendon. This Golgi tendon reflex helps to protect us from this to happen. Let me give you an example, real life example. How many of you have watched Dancing with the Stars? In one season of the Dancing with the Stars, they invited the Olympic an Olympic athlete. Her name is Misty May. Misty May is an Olympic athlete for beach volleyball. Beach volleyball usually is played by two athletes, okay? Her partner is called Carrie, I forgot her name, Carrie something. Yeah, Misty May and Carrie something. So what happened is that Misty May participated in Dancing with the Stars. She's a professional athlete. According to their history, they become very famous because they are at the peak of their career. At the peak of their career, they never lost a game, international game. So they all get gold medal. They're good friends. They're very close. They practice all the time. They know their stuff. They know each other very well. So Misty May, a professional athlete, joined the Dancing with the Stars, and then when Misty May is performing, Misty May was teamed up with the one of the dancer, Mark, the Russian guy, the tall Russian guy. So they're practicing something called Lindsay hop. Lindsay hop, basically they have this movement. I don't know if I can show it to you on the video. Let me see. Okay. Okay, can you see my leg? Okay, you can see my leg. Okay. So my leg. Okay. So when you do Lindsay hop, you have to extend your leg. You have to extend your leg like this. But in order to make Lindsay hop looks good, when we extend the leg, usually our foot is a plantar flex. Is plantar flex. Okay, to prevent the overstretching of your calcaneal tendon. But for Lindsay hop to look good, the dancer has to force their leg dorsiflex like this. Remember dorsiflex, plantar flex, has to force the leg plantar flex so that when they stretch the leg, so it will look like this. So your feet is dorsiflex, okay, instead of plantar flex. Normally when you stretch your leg in the air, it is plantar flex, because the plantar flex is basically this reflex protecting your overstretching of your calcaneal tendon. So when she's doing this Lindsay hop movement, stretching his leg in the air, dorsiflexing, guess what? She is, let me show you. Okay. She is using this top-down inhibition here to inhibit her tendon reflex, so that she can do the dorsiflex and so that it will look good, okay? But as you know that Misty May is a beach volleyball player. Beach volleyball player, they have to jump and run on the sand. That means she has a very, very strong quadricep and hamstring. So when she is using her top-down inhibition to prevent this reflex so that she can do the dorsiflex, guess what? There is a security camera video recording their practice. In the video, you can actually hear a pop sound when she was doing that. The pop sound is actually the breaking of her calcaneal tendon. After the pop sound, you can see that her face is extremely painful. She only used one leg hopping backward, and then so that when her back rests on the wall, she slowly lie down using one leg. So the other leg, because the other leg you pop your calcaneal tendon, it is extremely painful. So let me ask you a question. How long does it take to heal a fractured bone? Let me give you 5 seconds to think about it. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. A bone fracture usually takes 6 weeks. Why? because bone has a lot of vasculation, has a lot of blood vessels. A lot of blood vessels, that means it carry a lot of nutrient. When you have a lot of nutrient, then your bone heals quickly, 6 weeks. What about when you break a tendon? When you have tendon damage, when you damage your tendon, how long does it take? Let me give you 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. To heal a tendon, it takes approximately 6 months. 6 months to heal a tendon, okay? So when you ask a professional athlete to be bedridden, or not just bedridden, to rest for 6 months, not practicing 6 months, basically you're asking her to have an early retirement. Yes. And the truth is that yes, after this injury, she retired from her professional volleyball career. And that causes a big issue to her partner, Carrie. Carrie Walsh, yeah, I remember her name. Carrie Walsh, yeah. Carrie Walsh, because okay, they are the best team in the world at that time. No one can defeat them. Even the Brazilian, they are also very good at beach volleyball, but but none of them can beat this Carrie Walsh and Misty May. So now I remember the next Olympic that it was in Russia. The next Olympic, it was in Russia. Carrie Moss had no choice but pick up a new partner. And guess what? Yes, they still get a medal, but it is just a bronze medal. They can no longer get the gold medal, the new team. Okay, so after that Olympic, Carrie was also retired. There's no point to compete anymore. Yeah. So yeah, that's the end of her legacy. This is so sad. So it tells you that yes, although our brain allows us to inhibit the most of the reflex, try not to do this. Reflex has a purpose, is to protect us from damage. Okay, most of the reflex is to protect us from damage. So if you intentionally to inhibit your reflex, it may cause damage to your body. It may or may not. Okay. Let me see. Is that all? Okay. Next one. The last one is okay. The last one is called a withdrawal reflex. Or it is called a flexor reflex, or it is called flexion reflex. The receptor is the nociceptor. Noci does not mean that the receptor is very curious. No. Noci, this prefix comes from the word noxious. It is a receptor that detects noxious signal. In other words, it is for pain. Okay. And nociceptor for pain. Nociceptor is a free nerve ending. Free nerve ending, that means it doesn't have anything wrapped around the end. It's not like let's say Pacinian corpuscles. Pacinian corpuscles, it has some membrane wrapped around the ending. But it does this one free nerve ending, that means it has nothing to wrap around. An example is pain withdrawal reflex. I'll tell you what is the pain withdrawal reflex. Okay, this one I need you to have a full page. Landscape large, because both left and right, I need to draw on both left and right. I need a very large picture. Oh, this is still small. It's so small. Large. Oh, okay, kind of large. Okay, let's try, see if it works. Okay, this is not a very good spinal cord. Okay, in the real whiteboard, I can draw it better. Okay. Central canal. Same thing. We have the DRG, dorsal root ganglion. Okay. All right, let's start. We have the free nerve ending here. Okay, nociceptor. Again, the afferent neuron. There's the cell body in the dorsal root ganglion. In here, it's split to 5. It goes to 5 split. Okay. 2 on this side. And then 2 on this side. And then 1 here, as usual. Okay, 1 is in here. So of course, the easiest one is the one that you know what I'm gonna do. Go to the brain. And then your brain will exert a very strong top-down inhibition as well. So almost all reflex, you can intentionally inhibit it. All right. This part is done. Yes, it's that simple. Now let's take a look at the interneuron. This part, the pain withdrawal reflex, is this part of the circuitry is basically identical to the previous one. The Golgi tendon reflex is basically identical, meaning that you have a inhibitory interneuron and you have the excitatory interneuron. And then for the inhibitory interneuron, it goes to your ipsilateral extensor. Again, quadricep. Oh, sorry, it should be DRI, not DA. I keep spelling it wrong. Quadricep. Oh, gosh. Usually for spelling mistake, if I teach anatomy, I'll deduct 0.5 point. So I'll deduct 0.5 point for myself. keep on spelling it wrong. I didn't notice that until now. Right. And then the other one, ipsilateral flexor. Again, hamstring. All right. So this one is the alpha motor neuron. This is also alpha motor neuron. Okay. There is no gamma motor neuron going back to the nociceptor. So let me explain this. Let me explain this. Okay, I don't need to show you. Okay, I can do this. Let me see. Oh, do I have anything to? Okay. So this is a human body. Okay, this is a really bad. My two fingers are the human legs. Okay, human legs, two human legs. So let's say my left leg. Is it my left leg? Oh no, this is the left leg. The left leg. Is it left leg? It's lateral. Whatever, whatever. One of the leg, doesn't matter which one. One of the leg step on a nail. Step on a nail. Oops! It hurts, right? Step on a nail. It hurts. Then what will happen? When it step on a neck, it hurts. What will happen? It will immediately withdraw because it's called pain withdrawal reflex. It will withdraw like this. So let me show you sideways. So if this leg hit the nail, then you will withdraw like this. So when it withdraw like this, what happened? Your hamstring behind your hamstring actually contract, but your quadricep relax. Okay, so you can tell that it is exactly the same as your Golgi tendon reflex, but the receptor involved is totally different. So that's why in here, so the nociceptor of your left leg step on a nail, so it will start to fire action potential. The action potential will travel through the DLG, go to here. Then you will activate the inhibitory interneuron. The inhibitory interneuron will trigger action potential and then release GABA in this inhibitory synapse, so that when GABA binds to this alpha motor neuron, then you will trigger IPSP. IPSP, that means this alpha motor neuron will hyperpolarize. Hyperpolarization of this motor neuron does not trigger action potential, so the extensor quadricep muscle will be relaxed. On the other hand, action potential will go to this branch and activate the excitatory, you see this is the arrowhead, excitatory interneuron. So that this excitatory interneuron will trigger an action potential, and then at the synapse here, you will release glutamate. When glutamate binds to this alpha motor neuron, you will trigger EPSP. And when the EPSP submate, okay, temporal, spatial submation, then you will trigger action potential, travel along this alpha motor neuron. And then the action potential will go through the neuromuscular junction, and it causes this flexor hamstring to contract. So that when you step on a nail, this leg will withdraw, contracting the quadricep hamstring at the back, relaxing the quadricep anteriorly. Then you withdraw your leg. Okay. What about the opposite end? The opposite side? The opposite side, you have similar, but opposite thing happen. you have an inhibitory interneuron here. You have an excitatory interneuron here. And then you will have the contralateral extensor and contralateral flexor here. So let's take a look what happened. Extensor, of course, is also quadriceps. Now I spell correctly. Contralateral flexor, hamstring. All right. So of course, they are also alpha motor neuron, Okay, it's the same motors, but the connection is a little bit different in here. Let's take a look. When you step on the nociceptor, then action potential will go to here. You'll activate the excitatory interneuron here. So that action potential will be triggered in this excitatory interneuron. Then glutamate will be released in this excitatory synapse. When glutamate binds to this alpha motor neuron here, you'll depolarize this alpha motor neuron so that the alpha motor neuron will trigger an action potential. The action potential will go, travel along the axon, and then going through the neuromuscular junction, and then stimulate, and then you cause the extensor quadriceps to have action potential, meaning that when it will make the extensor quadriceps to contract. In here, the opposite thing happened. So it will actually inhibit the flexor hamstring. In other words, you have a totally opposite reaction in your contralateral leg. What does it mean? Look at this again. When it hits on the nail, okay, of course this one will, remember the ipsilateral one, the hamstring will contract, the quadricep will relax so that you can pull your leg away from the stimulus or the nail. What about this leg? This leg, your quadricep will contract, but your hamstring at the back will relax so that you will straighten your leg like this. Why? Well, think about this. This isn't that the most obvious one. You are stepping on a nail. Of course, you want to withdraw the injured leg. When you withdraw the injured leg, you want to straighten your uninjured leg so that you can stand on one leg. When the quadricep contract, the hamstring relax, then this uninjured leg is straightened or extend, then it can support your entire body so that you will keep standing up. Okay? In other words, it is for you to balance your body, balance your center of mass. Let me give you an example. You see this a lot in a movie or a cartoon or comedy. People exaggerate this. Again, let's say someone drop brakes or someone hammer the toe of that person so that it hurt this person a lot. Then what happened? This person, of course, you see that, okay, you will withdraw the injured leg, and then this person will start to jump on the ground. Oh, it hurts, it start to jump on the ground, right? Why you will jump on the ground? Because this part, the contralateral leg, it will extend the quadricep and relax the hamstring. And the contraction of quadricep is so strong that not only it will make the leg straighten, but it is so strong that it is actually will cause the person jump on the ground. See, it extend this one. It withdraw this leg and at the same time extend this one, then it will jump. So that's why in many of the comedy or cartoon or movie, they exaggerate this phenomenon. And you see that people are holding the injured leg on one side and then the other leg keep on jumping, jumping, jumping. It hurts when it jump. When it jump, it's like, oh, it hurts, okay? Because of this reflex. So I'm running out of space here. So I'm not going to write, okay, all these are basically a polysynaptic or disynaptic. Or we call it a polysynaptic or disynaptic here. Doesn't matter which one you use. As I said, as long as it is monosynaptic, it doesn't matter. And then, of course, they are the reciprocal. Innervation. This is also reciprocal. And then guess what? When we combine these two together, we call this cross-extensor reflex. Cross-extensor reflex, okay? Did I miss anything? Okay, function. To remove a limb from painful stimulus. Another function, to balance the center of mass. Let me give you another example, okay? This example, I heard it from my Berkeley neuroanatomy professor. He's very sadistic. You don't think that your professor is crazy, he's sadistic. No. They are professor worse than me, okay? When I was undergrad, when I was taking, after I transferred from Glendale Community College, I went to UC Berkeley, and I took the upper division neuroanatomy. The professor was a very old professor. He is very experienced. He told us that when you want to learn about nervous system, you always start to learn from the spinal cord, because spinal cord circuitry the circuitry in the spinal cord, they are very simple and practical. They are so simple and practical that evolution developed a lot of useful circuitry connection in the spinal cord so that the brain copy those circuitry in the brain. So there are lots of circuitry you find in the spinal cord. You see the same circuitry in the brain because it takes a lot of energy and time, a long time, in order to develop a circuitry that can that will be able to that will allow the animal adapt to the environment. It's all about trial and error. It takes a long time for trial and error for the nervous system to develop the circuitry that is that allow the animal to adapt in the environment. So if it works in the spinal cord, then our brain just lazily copy the circuitry to the brain so that our brain use the same circuitry. So he always emphasized, okay, study the spinal cord first. It turns out that he's one of the pioneers to do a certain experiment. But let me tell you his a crazy example. When I was taking his class, neuroanatomy, it was at that time Christopher Reeve had his injury, the famous injury. How many of you still remember who Christopher Reeve is? Christopher Reeve is the original Superman, the Man of Steel, original Superman, the Man of Steel. So he made a lot of money from his role playing as the Superman. So he's so rich that he has a horse. Not only that, he actually played polo. Okay, normal people like us. Okay, I guess none of us has a horse. Okay, we may have a chance, we may have experience riding a horse before, but I don't think we have extra money to keep a horse. Not only we don't have a horse, we don't have the time and we don't have the free time to practice riding a horse so that we're good enough to play polo. Okay, but he has all the money and time so that he play polo. And his famous accident is that while he was playing polo, he fell from the horse and then he landed his body by his head. Yes, his head hit the ground. And then guess what? When his head hit the ground, he break his neck. He break his neck. He literally break his neck. When he break his neck, what happened? When he break his neck, he actually severed this connection. He break his neck. I don't know if you see that. The bottom up and the top down connection, I partially erase it so that you see that, okay, this is what happened. His neck is broken so that everything from the neck up, he can feel it, he can control it, but everything from neck down, he cannot feel anything, he cannot control it. What do I mean by that? Theoretically, after the injury, if he is as poor as your professor, I'll die because I don't have enough money to pay for the treatment or equipment to sustain my life. But because he is very rich, okay, he has money to keep a horse, he has money to play polo, okay. So guess what happened? People connect him to different machines to sustain his life. For example, if you have a neck injury like this, what will happen? Your respiratory center is in your neck. So if you damage it, your respiratory center in your neck cannot communicate with your diaphragm and your intercostal muscle. What does it mean? That means you will stop breathing. When you stop breathing, that means you will not have fresh air going into your lung. Then your body continue to use up the oxygen to make ATP, right? So you use up the oxygen in your blood first, and then you will continue to use up all the air in the reserve of your lung. Your lungs store quite a lot of several liters of air there. But then because your lung is not pumping, is not expanding and contracting, then you will use up all the air in the lung. When all the air in your lung is used up, then what will happen? Then your blood will not have oxygen. When your blood does not have oxygen, then your brain cells start to die. Your heart muscle, cardiac muscle will also start to die. When your heart muscle start to die, then your heart muscle stop beating. When your heart muscle stop beating, then your brain does not get enough nutrient and your brain starts to die as well. When your neck is broken, does it affect your heartbeat? Well, I'll give you 5 seconds to think about the answer. Is it either yes or no? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Time's up. When you break your neck, it will not stop your heartbeat, but it will affect your heart rate. What do I mean by that? Your heartbeat is triggered by your SA node, sinoatrial node, which is located on your, right atrium. So breaking your neck, your heart will continue to beat. As long as you have enough oxygen in your blood to supply the cardiac muscle, then your heart theoretically can beat continuously. But after breaking the neck, you can no longer control your heart rate, meaning that when you are nervous, then your heart rate cannot increase. When you are relaxing, your heart rate cannot decrease. You'll just stay at the same heart rate. Okay, so what does it mean when Christopher Reeve broke his neck? I said that everything on top of the neck, he can feel and control it. Meaning that if you pinch his ear, he can feel it. Ouch. Or if you pinch his nose, he can feel it. If you poke his face, he can feel it. He can actually speak. He can curse you, okay? He can say the 4-letter words to curse you. But if you pinch his arm, he cannot feel anything. And he cannot move his arm to hit you. He cannot move his lower part of anything lower under his body, under his neck, he can have no control. Okay? Not even the autonomic nervous system, not even the sympathetic or parasympathetic nervous system. He cannot control anything up under the neck. But it doesn't mean that everything under the neck is damaged. As a matter of fact, the rest of his body are intact, including this circuitry here. This circuitry is completely intact. Or let me give you an example. If you induced a knee-jerk reflex on his leg, you will see his knee jerk. Okay, you will see his knee jerk. As a matter of fact, he will give you the best knee jerk because he can no longer have a top-down inhibition here. When someone has no top-down inhibition, the knee-jerk reflex will be very high, very strong, as if the person is doing the ganglia maneuver. So it is even stronger than doing the ganglia maneuver. It will be stronger than that. Okay. That's why if you put Christopher Reeve on a treadmill, guess what? He can walk on a treadmill, but when he walks, he cannot feel it. The walking mechanism on the treadmill is basically a reflex. It's a form of spinal cord reflex. He can walk not because he can control his skeletal muscle. He can walk because it is a reflex in the spinal cord that causes him to walk on the treadmill. So this is the sadistic example. He said that, okay, let's say I am Christopher Reeve. Okay, you put me sitting on a table, and then I put my two arm, my two arm in front of a table. Okay, in front of this fist, you put a candle of fire. In front of this feet, you put a nail bed. A nail bed, that means you have a lot of sharp point in front of this fist. So what happened is that you blow the fire in front of this fist, so that the fire touching this fist. When fire touch this fist, it burned your fist. It burned Christopher Reeve's fist. So what will happen? You will induce the pain withdrawal reflex of this fist. So this fist will withdraw, okay? But when this fist withdraw, the contralateral limb will extend because of the cross extensor reflex. When this fist extend, you hit the nail bed. When you hit the nail bed, it will trigger the nociceptor as well. The nociceptor will cause this fist to have the pain withdrawal reflex like this. And at the same time, cross extensor reflex will occur and extend this fist to hit the fire of the candle light, and you'll burn this fist. So when you burn this fist, what will happen? Pain withdrawal reflex, and then cross extensor reflex to hit the nail bed. In other words, Christopher Reeve will keep on doing this. Boom, 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 boom. So he will keep on doing this. And then my professor said that, you know what is the coolest thing? He said that the coolest thing is that he see that he keep on injuring himself, but he cannot stop himself. Yeah, this is so sadistic the way he said it. Yeah, he sees that he can see that he is injuring himself, but he cannot stop himself. But at the same time, he cannot feel any pain. Okay, that's a good thing. So how can he stop this stupid? This is really stupid actually. How can he stop this really stupid thing that he do to himself? There are several things he can do. According to previous students, one of the students suggested, oh, he can blow the candle fire to extinguish it. So he can do this. Hopefully, he can blow off the fire on the candle so that it will stop burning one of the fists. Then it will effectively stop this cross extensor reflex. That is possible. Or he can scream and ask his nurse, "Nurse, can you stop me from injuring myself?" Then the nurse come in. I'm sure the nurse will laugh at him, seeing what he's doing. So, or the third thing. The third thing is also from my sadistic professor. He said that if he doesn't blow off the candle fire, if he doesn't scream and call his nurse, he can. Eventually this will stop. Why? Eventually, the nociceptor on one of the fists will be completely damaged, either by the fire, by the burn injury of the fire, or by the physical damage of the nail bed. So in either case, one of the hand the nociceptor of one of the hand will be completely damaged. When the nociceptor is completely damaged on one of the hand, then it will stop the entire cross extensor reflex circuitry. Yeah, so he is very sadistic. Yeah, he said, okay, that will stop it. So but he claimed that this is the most sadistic example in the neuroanatomy. So by telling you this most sadistic example in the neuroanatomy, I hope it will help you to remember this reflex forever. Okay, we are done with that. All right. We finished the lower level, the lowest level, or the local level. Lowest level, local. Now we start the middle level. Middle level, we'll first talk about the sensorimotor cortex. What is sensorimotor cortex? Sensorimotor cortex is basically S1 and M1. In our sensory physiology lecture, we already talked about S1, the primary sensory cortex, and we haven't talked about M1, primary motor cortex yet. Does anyone remember the location of the primary motor cortex? Let me give you 5 seconds to think about the answer. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, time's up. The primary motor cortex is located in your frontal lobe. Specifically, it is located in your prefrontal gyrus. Prefrontal gyrus. That is your primary motor cortex. Just like S1, your primary motor cortex also has homunculus. You also have a mini-me. You have a mini-me inside your brain. In other words, you have two mini-me inside your brain. One is on S1, one is on M1. The mini-me you see here, it is the mini-me on M1. Similar to the S1, you see that, okay, your finger or your hand has a very large representation on M1. Why? Because we have a very good control of our hand and fingers. But our body trunk it has a relatively small representation because we have a limited amount of control of our body trunk muscle. Similarly, we have a large representation of our face because we have a lot of facial expression, okay? So in other words, the homunculus on M1 correspond to the how much control we have of that part of the body. Whereas the S1 primary sensory cortex corresponds to the how sensitive the particular part of the body is. The more sensitive, the larger the representation on S1. For M1, the more control we have on that part of the body, the larger the representation, okay? So that's the minor differences, that's the differences. But we have two of this homunculi in our body. And then after, okay, the M1 primary motor cortex, so all these, they are, what I want to bring up is that the M1 primary motor cortex is part of the middle level motor control. Another one that is also belong to the middle level motor control, it is the premotor cortex. Premotor cortex, what's the function of that? Is to control the movement of larger muscle group. Control movement of larger muscle groups. Okay, we will continue the middle level structure in the next slides because I'm running out of space and we are getting into important topics now. So we continue with the middle level here. We talk about M1 and a premotor cortex in the previous slides. Now we get to, oh, let me put the stars here. Basal ganglia. and thalamus. Okay. Okay, the function of thalamus. Thalamus. Thalamus basically is a relay station. What do I mean by that? The input and output go through here. What do I mean by input and output? The input, namely the sensory, what you feel. Output, motor, what is your response? Okay, your response. And then what about basal ganglia? The function of basal ganglia, normally basal ganglia, guess what? Inhibit thalamus. Normally basal ganglia inhibit thalamus. Normally, okay? So, when your basal ganglia malfunction, what will happen? You can induce neurodegenerative diseases. Two of them, at least. They are the famous one, Huntington. Huntington's disease. Huntington disease, the most famous symptom is called chorea. Chorea in Latin, it means dance, dance movement. What does it mean? For Huntington patients, they have this spastic muscle movement. Meaning that suddenly they will move very dramatically, as if they are dancing. But it is uncontrollable. They cannot control it. Suddenly they will suddenly move a very large movement. It is something that they cannot control. It is not something that they intentionally to do it in public to catch people's attention. No. It is called a chorea. But our focus is not on Huntington disease. Our focus is Parkinson disease. Parkinson disease is the polar opposite of Huntington disease. Parkinson is like the polar opposite of the Huntington disease. What happened? The causes. Okay. Let's put the symptom first. The symptom basically, at first, initially, you have something called resting tremor. I'll explain to you what resting tremor is, and then later on, as Huntington disease progresses, you will actually freezing. That means not only your face do not have any emotion, your facial muscle will completely no movement. and your rest of the body will eventually stop. You won't be able to control it. It just freeze. You cannot move any of your body part. The causes. What's the causes? DA. DA stands for dopamine. Okay. DA stands for dopamine. Dopaminergic neuron die in a structure called substantia nigra. Substantia nigra. Substantia nigra literally means black substance. This is the Latin meaning as well, black substance. Nigra means black, substantia means substance. Why would neuroanatomists call it like this? Well, of course, the simplest reason. In the past, when the neuroanatomists cut open the brain, they see that in this part of the brain, you have some black dot. You have some black dot in this part of the brain. They are curious. They don't know what that is. Okay, then let's just call this part black substance. So that's how they call it substantia nigra. And then what happened? Oh, we said that dopaminergic neuron dies in the substantia nigra. That means you have a decrease in the dopamine level in your brain. Remember when we talk about chemical synapse, I gave you an example. I used dopamine as one of the example for the neurotransmitter. I told you that if we have a very high dopamine level, we will have schizophrenia. If we have a abnormally low dopamine level, we will have the Parkinson's disease. So that is the reason that we are talking about here. When dopaminergic neuron die in substantia nigra, then we don't have the neuron to secrete dopamine. That means our brain will have a low dopamine level. Okay, let me color code it so that it will form a stronger contrast. Normal. I don't want to say normal as if let's just say healthy individual. Healthy individual. Substantia nigra. Excite basal ganglia. What does basal ganglia normally do? Basal ganglia normally inhibit thalamus. Okay, that's the normal circuitry. And you know that thalamus, okay, it will trigger the, let's say, motor response, because I told you that thalamus is a relay station. So both the sensory and motor information will go through the thalamus. So the motor output also go through it. So in other words, thalamus needs a normal amount of inhibition from basal ganglia in order to keep it function normally, in order to let the optimal motor output, in order to in order to let go of the optimal level of motor output. Okay, it needs the basal ganglia to inhibit it at a certain level in order to give out a healthy amount of motor output, motor response. What about PD? For patient with PD, okay, as I said that the dopaminergic neuron dies in substantia nigra. In other words, your substantia nigra is dying because the neuron there is dying, okay? It makes sense, right? If the dopaminergic neuron in substantia nigra dies, that means the substantia nigra is also dying. Well, substantia nigra is a structure made up of dopaminergic neuron. Basically, this is what it means. And then when the substantia nigra is dying, you don't have enough dopaminergic neuron, then what will happen to the excitation here? It will weaken the excitation to the basal ganglia. When basal ganglia do not receive enough excitatory input, so that means you have less action potential. Okay. When you have less action potential going into basal ganglia, that means basal ganglia will not be very active. When basal ganglia will not be very active, what will happen? It will also weaken the inhibition that normally basal ganglia will exert onto the thalamus. Let me repeat. Basal ganglia is dying, generate less action potential, so the basal ganglia will not be that active. So basal ganglia will decrease its activity, will be less active. That's why the inhibition will be weakened. When you weaken the inhibition, what does it mean? It will increase the activity of the thalamus. We call this double negative again. This is another example of double negative. Double negative here, you lower the excitation. That means you release, you exert less inhibition. Less inhibition, that means releasing the thalamus. When you release the thalamus, you increase the excitation of the thalamus. Then what will happen to the motor output? The motor output will be greatly enhanced. So I draw a big fat arrow, and it's as if it is not important. I put an upward arrow here for the motor response. So when that means in the patients of Parkinson's disease, they will have increased motor response. Increasing motor response, what does it mean? Increasing motor response, what will the symptom? It will be when you have increased motor response, then you have resting tremor. So what is resting tremor? I may or may not have already told you. I used to, well, I spent a long time in graduate school getting my PhD. I also spent a long time doing my postdoc. So I spent a long time working in universities, okay? So I attended many graduations. Whenever I go to the graduation, I noticed almost every year when I go to graduation, I notice something in common. I will look at the those professors sitting on the stage, and then it's like every year I notice at least one professor, they will show resting tremor on the stage. So what is resting tremor? So what happened is that, okay, the professor is sitting on the stage, okay, nothing happened normally, they just sit there. But when the keynote speakers start to talk, when the keynote speakers start to give a speech, then guess what? There is always one professor, his hand will start to shake, or his leg like this, his leg will start to shake. Okay, it's like, okay, up and down, the knee will go up and down like this. His leg will start to shake, or his arm will start to shake when the keynote speaker is speaking. When the keynote speaker finishes his speech, then his so-called tremor or shaking of the arm or leg or both will stop. So this is a resting tremor. How's that? Resting tremor is that when a person is resting, when a person is not paying attention to his arm or to his leg, then when he's not paying attention to it, then the arm and leg will start to shake. But the person can consciously and voluntarily inhibit the shaking. If he pay attention to his arm and leg, then the tremor or the shaking will stop. That's why normally you don't see the arm shaking or tremor. But when the keynote speaker starts to speak and he's distracted by the speech of the keynote speaker, or we can say it when he focuses on the speech of the keynote speaker and he pay less attention to his arm and leg, then the resting tremor will surface. The resting tremor will appear. But after the keynote speaker finished the speech, then he no longer focus on the speech. He can refocus on his arm and leg. Then he will intentionally stop the shaking because it is embarrassing. But as I said before, resting tremor is the symptom for the initial stage of Parkinson's disease. As the disease progresses, what happened? The dopaminergic neuron continue to die, and your substantia nigra continue to die. It will go to something called a point of no return. Even you want to intentionally suppress it, you cannot do that. Basically, the tremor is so obvious, you can no longer stop you actually watch your hands shaking, and you can no longer stop your hands shake, even though you want to. You focus very hard, stop shaking, but it still continue to shake. And as it continue to progress, as you know that all your brain, the neuron, they connect with each other through synapse. So one neuron connect with another neuron through a synapse, and then another neuron connect to that neuron with another synapse. So they are all connected. Eventually, when the substantia nigra dies, other part of your brain also dies. So eventually you lose control of your whole body. That's why everything freezes. You can no longer move your limb, you can no longer move your facial muscle, okay? And guess what is the ultimate one? When your brain continue to die one after another, when enough brain cells die, you will also die. That's the end of your life. So that's why I call it neurodegenerative disease. Degenerative meaning that your brain is dying one part after the other. So that's why I said that Alzheimer's disease, Huntington disease, Parkinson disease. All these three together we call neurodegenerative disease. Of course, we have other neurodegenerative disease. Cerebellum will also degenerate. But the thing is that they are incurable. They are like cancer. So as soon as you know that someone get it, you assume that that person get cancer. Cancer is better. You can do chemo or you can do chemotherapy and or radiation therapy. So or you can even do surgery to cut out the tumor. So at least you have 3 ways to treat the tumor. You have the chance, okay? As long as the tumor does not relapse or reappear, then okay, you have a good chances to recover. But for these 3 neurodegenerative, there's no cure. There's no treatment. There's treatment, okay? But it does not cure. It does not really eliminate the problem. It's just slowly your brain dies. When your brain dies, then you will die. So it's a very sad disease. And as I mentioned before, all these 3 neurodegenerative disease not only will cause symptom: Alzheimer's disease, memory loss; Huntington disease, dramatic movement; Parkinson disease, freezing, okay? Especially for Parkinson's disease, the patient will change personality. Personality will change. So it is very harsh to the family member who live with them, especially the spouse, because oh, you married to this wonderful person for so many years, and then at the end of the life, when they are senior, this person changed to a mean person or volatile person, scream to you easily. Okay, don't take it personally. Remember, it is a neurodegenerative disease. Okay, let's continue with the middle level of the motor control. Another structure in the middle level is my favorite structure. Okay, my favorite structure. What is my favorite structure? Cerebellum. Cerebellum. Cerebellum in Latin, it means little brain. Okay, I mentioned that before. Remember, we talked about intention tremor. So I hope you can tell the differences between intention tremor versus resting tremor. I don't know if I have given you this table, but if not, then let me repeat this. If I did give you this table, apologize. Let's have a review. If I have not given you this table, that's good. Let's go over this now. We have intention tremor. Okay, okay, we have the tremor type. We have the intention. And then we have the resting. Intention tremor because you have something wrong with your cerebellum. We call this location. Resting tremor, you have something wrong with your substantia nigra. Your substantia nigra is dying. And then what else? Oh, the symptom. Yeah, the symptom. When you intended to want move, then you have tremor. When you are intended to move, you have tremor. Okay. When you are intended to move, then you have tremor. But when you no tremor, then you have no tremor. When you are not intended. Not intended. What do I mean by not intended? It's like, as I told you that, if you remember, I gave you an example, like a reflex. So remember, I gave you the example. If I try to grab this, if I try to grab this pen, and then I intend to grab this pen, then my hand will keep shaking, and then when I grab it, okay, I continue to shake. So this is called intention tremor. But if I throw my pen to myself and then, ooh, the pen is coming, then I catch my pen by a reflex. And if you record my movement and you replay the movement in a slow motion, you see that my motion of catching the pen, my motion of catching the pen is actually smooth. There's no tremor. For resting tremor, okay, you have tremor when distracted or when you're not paying attention. No tremor when you pay attention, or when you intended. I just use the word intended to be consistent, but it's okay. You know what I mean, right? Pay attention or intended. You can voluntarily stop your tremor. Okay. For the cerebellum, we also talk about the pendular reflex. Touching your nose, touching the finger of your doctor, is a way to test for, it's a pendular reflex is actually a symptom or a positive test result for the loss of proprioception or damage in your cerebellum. Damaging cerebellum can cause the loss of proprioception. And then function of the cerebellum, coordination of movement. Another function, integration of sensory input. This is for motor learning. Pendular reflex is to test the proprioception. And then okay, that's it. That's about the cerebellum. And then we will talk about two more structure. One is called cortical spinal tract. Cortical spinal tract, what does it mean? Cortical means your cortex. Spinal means your spinal cord. That means it is from which cortex? Which cortex? Take a guess. From M1 to your spinal cord. From M1 to your spinal cord. That means this is your top-down motor control. This cortical spinal tract carries your top-down motor command from your brain to your peripheral nervous system. It has a different name. AKA pyramidal tract. Some people call it pyramidal tract. It doesn't sound so good. We should call it pyramidal tract. Same thing is talking about the top-down motor pathway. Okay. So it is for fine muscle control. Okay. You know that, okay, our left side of the brain and the right side of the brain, they are, your left side of the brain control your right side of the brain, right side of your body movement. Your right side of your brain controls your left side body movement. Where do they cross? Do you know the location of this crossover? Let me give you 5 seconds to think about your anatomy. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, they cross at medulla oblongata. But if you have taken anatomy, we don't use the word cross, because cross is like someone who doesn't know science, someone who has never taken anatomy, then they use the word cross. If you have taken anatomy, you shouldn't use the word cross. You should use the word decussate. Decussation. Decussate is the verb. Decussation is the noun. Decussate means crosses at okay. And then we have something called a multi-neuronal tract. It is another structure now. Multi-neuronal tract has a different name. Again, oh, you learn about neuroanatomy, you know that they have all kinds of name. It's called extra pyramidal tract. Extrapyramidal tract, what's the function? Function is for, again, posture or balance. Another function, growth, muscle control. So the fine muscle control, you have cortical spinal tract. Gross muscle control, you have multi-neuronal tract. Okay. Let's go to the upper or the highest level. The highest level. Oh yeah. Nice. The highest level. Highest level, you have something called a supplementary motor cortex. What is the function? The function is to plan motor response. Is to plan motor responses. Or we call this the intention. To move, the intention to move. The intention to move. What does it mean? In your there is an experiment described in your lecture notes. I call this EXPT, means experiment. Okay, experiment. So your M1, well, let me put it this way. Your M1 becomes active. Guess what? Before you have the actual movement. That makes sense, right? Because we have the cortical spinal tract. Cortical spinal tract connects your M1 to your spinal cord and then to your peripheral. Let's say I want to move the fingers, then my M1 will activate and then start firing action potential, go through the cortical spinal tract, go to my right arm, and then my finger will move, okay? How much ahead of time? Approximately 50 milliseconds before the actual movement. So it is pretty fast, millisecond, okay? So M1 start to become active 50 milliseconds before the actual movement that we can observe. What about this? I'm lazy. Let's just call it SMO. Not mainly because I don't have enough space to write here. Okay, let's just call it SMO. Supplementary motor cortex. Supplementary motor cortex is actually approximately 750 milliseconds before the activation of the M1. In other words, the activation of the supplementary motor cortex before the actual movement is actually approximately 800 milliseconds. So, meaning that supplementary motor cortex becomes active way before the M1 becomes active. So that's why scientists conclude that the supplementary motor cortex is for the intention to move. You form the intention to move. That's why this part will activate first. Okay, so that's why we call it the highest level, because the highest level is your cognitive thinking. Your cognitive thinking gives you the intention to move. So that is the highest level. I want to add something to the reflex. Okay, we learned about 3 types of reflex. I want to add a special one. The Pupillary light reflex. Some people just call it pupillary reflex. They just omit the word light. It's the same thing. What does it mean? It's very simple. Well, when you see a bright light, your pupil will constrict. Okay, this is what we call pupillary reflex or pupillary light reflex. It is your pupil responds to the light. Okay, and if you have watched enough of the TV drama, Grey's Anatomy, ER in the past, okay, you see this a lot. The doctor like to hold the flashlight like this, and then the doctor will point at the eye, will open the eye with the fingertip, and then shine the light into the eyeball to look at the eye. Why? How come the doctor do this all the time? They like to do this all the time. Why? The reason is that the doctor usually the doctor, okay, what kind of patient the doctor will do this to? Usually the doctor will do this to a patient who are sleeping or who are unconscious in comatose. They want to do this to make sure that, okay, the patient is still alive. Okay, why is that? If a patient is dead, then when he shine the light into the pupil, then you don't see this pupillary light reflex. That means the pupil will not constrict. That's why it is the simplest way and also the accurate way to test if the patient is alive. You may ask, well, what about feeling the pulse at the radial artery, or measuring or feeling the breathing in front of the nose? No, these are not accurate because you feel it. Maybe the pulse is so weak, your fingertips cannot feel the pulse, or the breathing is so weak, your finger cannot feel the air movement. But the pupillary light reflex is accurate because you can see the pupil moving, meaning constricting. So confirm. We use it to confirm brain death. Brain death. Why? Because the pupillary light reflex rely on pretectal nuclei. If your brain is dead, then the pretectal nuclei will become inactive. When your pretectal nuclei becomes inactive, then when you shine the light into the eye, you don't see any changes in the pupil. And take a guess. Let's say you do this, okay? And then you shine a light on one eye, okay? You shine the light on one eye. What happened to my other eyes? In other words, I'm asking you, is the pupillary light reflex bilateral or ipsilateral? Let me repeat the question. Is the pupillary light reflex bilateral or ipsilateral? So you can do this experiment. Okay, separate your two eyes, okay? And then you shine the light on one eye and then observe the pupil at the opposite eye. I'll give you 5 seconds to take a guess, or you can use your cell phone flashlight to do this on your family member or significant others. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, time's up. The answer is that pupillary light reflex, theoretically on a healthy individual, it is bilateral. Some people, they have injury before. Remember I asked you that, oh, how many of you get punched at your eye before? And I remember some students, they usually raise their hand. Usually they are guys, okay? But this semester, I have some female students in Glendale, they actually raise their hand as if they are very tough. Anyway, I remember you guys are the same. Some women, some females, and they raise their hand when I ask this question. So if you get punched in your eyes, then you may have damaged the nerve at this eye. Then your pupillary light reflex may not be bilateral. May not be bilateral. Yeah. So that's it for the motor physiology and reflex lecture. Okay, stop.